Welcome back to the show. Today we've got Ayeshah Abuelhiga on the show, and she is the founder and CEO of Mason Dixie Foods. She started this in 2014. It's now the fastest growing comfort food brand in the US, and it's best known for its clean label biscuits, sandwiches, and waffles. So, Ayeshah, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Kiri.
Well, breakfast is actually my favorite food, or I mean, favorite meal, I should say. And so this is like super fun for me. And I have to tell you, comfort food, especially more Southern based comfort food, is something I didn't even know was distinctly different in the breakfast sphere until I went to a conference. It was like our company was hosting a conference, the first job I had out of college. And one in the mornings, there was it was either waffles and fried chicken or biscuits and fried chicken or something. And I remember looking at it and being like, what is this? And someone next to me, like a guest, was like, this is my breakfast. We have this all the time. And I'm like, chicken and waffles or whatever it was, or biscuits and waffles. And I tried it and I enjoyed it. It was good. But I'm seeing like in the research of you that you grew up in Baltimore, which
Mhm.
I mean, does that have a lot of like Southern comfort food there and breakfasts?
Yeah, we do. It's a mid-Atlantic town, but I don't know, I'd say it's Southern leaning because it's a coastal culture, kind of similar to the Carolinas. Probably not as Southern focused as some other states, but quality of food, technique, people don't realize Maryland is hugely agricultural. So because we have that link, the quality of food and the pride that people take into the food they create is really, really high. So, and then on top of that, comfort food is it doesn't have to just be Southern. That's just a global thing that everybody loves. And I was lucky enough to have a mom who, when she came to this country, worked for a little comfort food kiosk at a food hall here. And that's kind of how, even though it's a blended family, we kind of got introduced to American comfort food.
Oh my gosh, I love that so much, especially just breakfast and comfort food. I'm getting hungry. So you started this company, Mason Dixie Foods, and you had a corporate job that you left, is how I'm understanding it. I saw that you were in marketing sales at Audi, which by the way is my husband's favorite car. He always has an Audi. And then I also saw you were in an IT company. So, what did you have to learn in order to, I mean, not only in mindset, but also in tactical actionable steps in order to leave corporate and open a restaurant? Those are two different spheres.
Yeah, I mean, I was lucky. I put myself through college working in restaurants. My family were two immigrants, so they didn't really have a lot of money. We grew up pretty poor. I mean, we were in Section 8 housing until I was about 13 years old. So there just wasn't a lot there. And I was first to go to college, so I had to kind of make my own ends meet. So working in restaurants gave me that visibility into what it's like to own and operate one. Not actually doing it, but actually watching it. And then I'd say, I was really lucky. I worked in consulting for a good chunk of the 15-year stint that I was in corporate. And consulting is not much different. I mean, you've got to be billable every hour of the day, and you learn how to make your keep, right? Because if you don't have an account to or a project to work on, you probably will get the chopping block eventually. So living on that edge all the time kind of made me pretty fearless about doing it for myself. So I think it's really not that hard to envision if you have a billable career, right? Anything that bills hourly, even if you're an architect. I mean, that type of lifestyle and drive is really what kind of became paramount to running a restaurant operation, to be honest.
I saw that you did a Kickstarter. Um,
Yes.
Tell us about that experience. I've never talked to anyone who's done a Kickstarter before.
So I was lucky again coming out of consulting when I was in software consulting. I had the pleasure of going to a conference at which point I was able to meet the founder of Kickstarter. He was a keynote speaker. And I found it fascinating because while it's very philanthropic and a good way for people to raise money, it's actually the genius of the platform is its SEO capability, right? Especially when it was first launching, because everybody who doesn't want to go to a website full of ideas, right? Like that's so cool. So bloggers and news outlets, I mean, they were all sourcing information from this thing. I mean, that's how the potato salad guy got $1 million to make potato salad, right? That whole crux was really what fascinated me, because when I was thinking about doing this, I wanted to obviously have this, 100 location, clean label, fried chicken and biscuits place, right? It was going to outseat Popeyes and KFC and Chick-fil-A. So I was like, all right, well, I can't create a concept that's just unique to the Mid-Atlantic. I mean, it has to have roots and be able to fill in communities in the Bay Area and in Maine and in Texas. So having the national visibility that Kickstarter brought immediately kind of put this big check mark for me to say, worth the investment, worth the risk, worth the time, right? Because if it wasn't scalable, I didn't want to do it. So it was a great litmus test that way. But I'll tell you, people think you could just create this little website and watch it do its thing. That's not how it works. And they're very clear about it when you set up a Kickstarter campaign. Like, you need to be on top of it. You need to be commenting. You need to be posting. You need to be sharing the content on social platforms. You got to get the visibility up. And we were lucky at the time. I mean, this is 10 years ago. We were able to be one of the first food concepts, the second restaurant concept ever on the platform. So it was unique enough that it was getting its own attention that way. I don't know how many have been funded on Kickstarter since then, but I basically didn't sleep for 30 days because I was on that thing 24/7. I mean, you're getting people from China that are giving you $1. So you have to be really cognizant to really be ready to build community through that platform if you're going to launch with it.
Do you remember how much you made from the Kickstarter?
Yeah, we had a goal of like 27,000 and we ended up making just over like 29 grand or something like that.
Wow.
It was less about the money though. I set the target pretty low because it was about what's a good enough target that it's enough to write home about, but what's going to get the eyes and the ability for people to contribute. I was like, look, if the worst case scenario was everybody only gave me $1, I felt like I could reach 30,000 people with $1, right? And that my odds were really good. Folks sometimes go out there guns a-blazing, hoping to raise $1 million. And I'm like, that's a lot of people and eyes, like tangible goals. And then on top of that, I wanted to make sure that I was going to get at least the hit rate to make me, and again, this was a test. This was a risk assessment for me. Are people going to want Mason Dixie's in San Francisco, in Nashville? If they don't, then I didn't want to go into it. But obviously I was proven that people wanted it. I mean, one of the most beautiful things too, that came out of Kickstarter was the emotion. Like, it drove what I thought the brand could be, but it proved that it needed to be that. So for example, I could have just opened up a restaurant with a name and had good food and kept everything agnostic and just made sure that we were just pumping. But what ended up happening was, like, everybody that gave us money sent a private note. And in the note, it would say, oh, I really want this to succeed because my grandmother made the best biscuit, or I had this jam that my grandma used to make, and it would be really awesome if you would try the recipe and put it on the menu. We did. Oh, this reminds me of great grandfather. He loved a tomato and ham biscuit. Everybody wanted to share something. So that meant that we had to put in a lot of personal equity into this to make sure that it was a brand that people emotionally connected with. And that means that it was real marketing work, right? It was real brand work. We had to give it the integrity it deserved. We couldn't just open up, pita shop, like something generic, it had to be all in. And I think if I never did the Kickstarter campaign, I might have treated this with less integrity than I should have, because it would have just been a business, and not really what ended up being, a complete, it's my whole soul now, right? Everything.
So you had investors eventually, or maybe right after the Kickstarter. Can you tell us a little bit about what that was like, especially being a woman and a woman of color, to go in front of investors and try to raise money?
So you're right. I tried raising money immediately, but that was a show. I mean, it was terrible. You're lucky enough to get an investor on the hook, because immediately, I'll never forget, it happened to me. And then I read or watched a video, I can't remember what it was, an article about what it is like for women to raise money. Every single person, if I was able to get somebody on the hook, wanted to tell me how to do my business. And I was like, if you know it so well, why didn't you open up your own Mason Dixie then? Could have been your concept. What am I here for, right? Do you know everything? Or what are you going to do when something wrong happens? Like you don't even know how to react if you had no customer. Like it was always like negative, like you're going to fail, right? Interestingly enough, I this was a couple years in. I'd seen an article. There was a psychological study on women pitching versus men pitching. It is 9 out of 10 times the investors ask women what you would do if you failed. How would you recover? Where for guys, it's what happens if this blows up? How are you going to open 10 units
Hmm.
today? It's incredible the difference in faith that male investors have. Now, because of how difficult it was, it took us a good 4.5 years before I even got even legitimate investors to talk to, where it wasn't just like Joe Schmo. But what I also found was I didn't like them, right? Venture capitalists, finance people, they talk very differently. They take the soul out of it. So I just told you how soulful the business was, and then they're taking it down to brass tacks, and it's like really disheartening, right? When you're an emerging brand, when you're a first timer, everything is in this, right? You was to dissect it down to nuts and bolts makes it really, it's heart wrenching.
Hmm.
So I didn't love that. So I was very lucky. I'd met who is now an investor, but he wasn't as big of an investor. He knew he needed a lot more money. So he was like, I'm going to introduce you to this guy. He's an investor in Five Guys, and he might be able to help you. So I was lucky, and I think lessons learned, stay local, because the people vote with their dollar where they can spend it. So
Hmm.
they want to see you personally. They want to see your business grow. They want to know that it's in their backyard. They still want to show it off, right? It's hard to do when it's nebulous or national or international, right? So that was one thing. And two, out of the experience of meeting with this man, just so you know, it's a funny story. I was supposed to meet him in DC, but he was a snowbird, so he was down in Florida at this time. I was lucky because I had a meeting with Publix and I was going to go down there, but we had no money, like none. I mean, we were down to the last dollars, and I couldn't even afford to stay in a hotel. So what I did was I had the meeting at Publix, and I drove through the swamplands to meet this guy 3.5 hours away, and took the red eye flight home. Like I was like prepared to sleep in the car if I had to. And I was like, this isn't going to go well. I don't know this guy. I'm driving through a swamp. I'm tired. This is going to be weird, right? And sure enough, he was pretty amazing because one of the first things that came out of his mouth was, he asked me the right questions, right? Why are you doing this? What's so inspirational about this? How do I know the biscuits are good, right? These are the questions I was prepared to answer. And by the end of it, he was like, I always invest in women if I can. And he said, because they're the hardest working people I've ever met. They always do it right and they always do it well. And
Hmm.
I was like, hell yeah, this is my person. Like this guy knows what's up. And sure enough, it did still take a while to convince him, right? Still had to get to know the business, still to to know me as a leader, but eventually, he did become our first and lead investor and probably our most important because he helped me recruit the rest of it. But I think what it taught me was you have to make sure you treat investor partners just like you would any other partner. I have a motto: investors are husbands without sex, right? They're legally binding people. You are in a financial relationship, a emotional, all of it with these people. Make sure that you like them, right?
Hmm.
And make sure that same thing as dating. The first thing that's most important, it's not looks, it's not money. It's, do you have the same value systems? So for him to come right out and start with questions about food, yes. Secondly, to state how important it was that he recognized women leaders are better in his opinion. Yes, right? But also test me, right? Don't just give me money because you think I'm a lowly woman. Like, he tested the business. He asked me all kinds of questions. Where is this? Where is that? Do you have this? Right? You got to do the diligence. So it's not easy. And I'll tell you, I probably kissed 100 frogs before we found him. And a lot of those were those VC types. Everyone says you got to get a VC, you got to get. In the end of the day, they just weren't my people. So don't be afraid. There's lots of colors in money. You don't need to go down one path just to get investment.
So how long did that take then from
Oh,
when you first started meeting investors to finding this one?
4 years,
It was 4 years. I thought that's
right?
what you
Because
said.
I
Okay.
started immediately after, but then I realized it wasn't going to happen. So I had to bootstrap it, right? So, when the Kickstarter launched, everybody was like, oh, now we got to buy them. Like people don't have any sense of time, right? Like, so they're immediately, because you have $27,000, I think you can open a whole restaurant and get a biscuit out within 2 weeks, right? So I was like, we got to give them something. So we did a little pop up at a friend's gelateria, and that was a game changer because we had all these lines. The Washington Post came out. It was just gangbusters. That's how I met Molly. But that event was us answering the mail. So then people that didn't get to make it or we ran out of food were like, can you do it again? So then bars would reach out and be like, hey, we have a really slow morning business. Why don't you come make food? We'll sell drinks. Yeah, okay. So we became these like pop-up queens. Like we just showed up everywhere. And so people were like, well, where can I find you? And I'm like, I don't know. You just got to check social because I don't know where we're going to be because we didn't have a home because I didn't have enough money to raise to get a physical
Mm.
restaurant in. So then we got asked to come into a full-time food hall. And at least they were creatively arranging the rent where it was a rev share. So we didn't have to shell out cash. So that allowed us to get started. And then we just piled all the cash until we raised enough money to open our own restaurant. And it was only when the restaurant started, and then on top of that, we got secret shop by Whole Foods, and they asked us to create a product line, and that went gangbusters. We just had all this momentum that we needed while I was still trying to actively raise money, right? It was like find every revenue making scheme you can to stay alive and attract interest so that we could get, the golden goose eventually. So I think everyone should be prepared to bootstrap as long as they can, as long as you physically, like I went to the last dollar before we were able to get investment in. Just kind of Murphy's Law. You just kind of end up in that
Yeah.
wheel now.
So I was going to ask you to try to distill that down to like one lesson for our listeners, but it sounds like it's really find every revenue stream that you can and just get the interest going, build momentum as much as possible.
Yeah,
Like don't turn down anything.
correct. And I think don't be quick to go and get investment out the gate. Like I'm not going to say I wasn't, but if I would have taken, like, for example, we had that one crappy guy that was telling me I was like, I didn't know anything about fried chicken and all this stuff. If I had listened to him, he probably would have given me the money. If I just said, oh, I don't know anything about anything, please give me the money, he would have been our first investor and I would not be here.
Yeah.
So you should always be looking.
Do you
But
think he would have like replaced you? Is that why you say you, or do you think you would have just
probably.
quit? You would have
Oh
been
yeah,
like,
no, or both. Both.
okay.
Both, honestly, right? He probably would have taken a controlling interest by running that thing into the ground, and then I would have left. So I think you have to talk to a lot of people. Like, don't think it's just going to happen overnight, right? Start the process years before you think you're going to need it, and always be proving that you're worthy, right? Like, you got to prove the business is worth something. And that's the naivete you have as a founder, right? Your idea is precious. You have the best kid in the world, right? Every mom thinks their kid is the best kid in the world, right? It's the same thing with business. The best business in the world. But nobody knows who you are. Nobody knows if you're going to be successful. And certainly a piece of paper that says business plan on it doesn't really scream it. You got to show it. And it's going to take longer than you think, but that's the right way to do things because then you maintain control over this baby that you birth into the world.
Mm. So tell us a little bit about what happened during COVID, because at that point you had a restaurant, a brick and mortar place. And for those of you who want to go look up online, like they had lines out the window, like a mile or two or something, like not out the window, out the door, just like going on. How did you, let's almost backtrack for a second. Is this all because of the interest that you were generating in the pop-ups that by the time it came to this restaurant, people were like, yes, finally a home for these products?
Yes.
All right.
I think if you have strong grassroots marketing and community building, people will show up for you no matter where you are. I mean, we could pop up in a toilet and somebody would come, right? That's the type of loyalty that you can bring when you're, all of us, my two chef partners at the time and myself were there I will never forget one time we did DC Pride and we had never had a food truck and we'd rented a food truck to do it. And it was 1,000 degrees. Reminder, this is a metal truck. right? And we had 2 deep fryers in it and an oven to make, I mean, it was a sauna in there. Everyone was grumpy because they were hot. They needed water. They needed to go to the bathroom. I mean, it was just a nightmare, right? But it was like, I mean, we did gangbusters, and at the end of the night, it was all kumbaya and everything. But I mean, that was the type of thing that we would all show up to. No ifs, ands, or buts. And that kind of commitment really allows people to feel like they know you as the owner. I think really often people think that businesses can be something where they can work 20% of the time and make a full-time salary and show up whenever they need to. No, people really only invest in you when they get something out of you. They want, don't underestimate how many times they want you. They just want you. The number of times I walk around now, and it's so humbling because this is not what I signed up for. I just really wanted to be a business owner and open a fried chicken and biscuit restaurant. So no, I can't walk through an airport sometimes without somebody going, "You're the biscuit lady," and "Can I help you?" Right? And I'm like, "Yeah, sure." It is game changing. And so your original question is about COVID. Imagine that's the kind of life we had, right? We were there every day. Our frozen business, no joke. We ran out of the broom closet. We shared the computer that the restaurant manager needed to print menus. I mean, 7 of us running in and out of a closet. Okay, just imagine that. And then being told no one can go in within 12 feet of each other. Everyone needs to be masked. You can't see customers. I'm like, well, what the hell are we going to do? Like, it was crazy. And then you got to remember too, as a business owner, as a CEO, as a leader, when things go wrong, everyone goes, whoop, and they're just like staring at you like, what are we going to do?
Waiting for you to have the answers.
Yeah, you got to have the answers, and you don't. So you make it up like you do. I'm sure moms do this all the time, right? Like, yeah, that's because the dinosaurs did this, or like, where do babies? You're on the fly, right? So I ended up just telling everybody, look, we're going to have to hunker down. My office will be central command. You guys go back to where you are and just wait for instructions, right? And it was just one of those things where it was 2 weeks go by. We're like, okay, we'll open the restaurant. We'll open it. And another 2 weeks go by. I was paying everybody because I didn't want to lose them.
Yeah.
And then eventually it was just too hard to do that, right? We tried reopening, but if you weren't in the mix, if you weren't adding all these apps and all these things and retraining, I mean, it was just too hard. And there are people that didn't want to go into the restaurant. They were scared. So, we made the tough call after about 4 months of trying to just close the restaurants. And at that time, I was like, we'll just reopen them when this thing is over. Obviously, it took 4 years. And it's honestly still not over, right? So, but at the same time, the crazy thing was the frozen business was booming because everybody was shopping in a grocery store. So never in a million years did I think that little marketing tactic of putting biscuits at a Whole Foods so that we could get people to come to the restaurant would ever net out to be what it ended up being, and that would be the business that we had. Never thought we would have to do that. So in many ways, was very lucky that we pivoted when we did and had the ability to pivot, because I had many a restaurant friend that didn't get that opportunity. They don't exist anymore. I also have many restaurateur friend that's done really well and put their whole soul into it, put the whole focus on the restaurants, and came out of that stronger than ever. And I take my hats off to anyone that's been able to survive the pandemic as a restaurateur. That means they did a lot of things right. And when I say a lot of things, I mean the most things. They basically were frontline. They had to deal with being tech experts. They had to create a logistics system to get food. I mean, like, you did a lot to stay on. So my hat goes off to them. But no, we were very lucky we were able to pivot. It was also really jarring too, because at that time we had just made the decision to move the business from DC to Baltimore, the frozen business, because I couldn't get office space that was cheap enough. So when we started looking at places, I was like, we should go to Baltimore. It's close enough so folks have to commute. They can. And it's my hometown. And there's a maker craft culture here, and an artsy culture, and a diverse culture that really supports homegrown people. Best decision I ever made in my life. But here we are waiting for the office to get done. And then all of a sudden the pandemic hits, and I'm like, all right, so we're working out of my apartment. And I turned my apartment into a UPS store because everything had to be shipped. And, it was just nuts, right? It was just, I was saying this yesterday, I'll never forget, because like when you bicker with your co-manufacturers over things, right? You end up having to go fly down there and look at the dough together. And I mean, imagine they don't even like picking up the phone because they're always around on the show on the factory floor. They're not. I mean, imagine me going, can you show me the dough, the butter kernels? And they're like taping, they're taping a line like this. And I'm like, I can't see it because you're moving your phone too. But it's just like, just the things that you do, but you got to do it. And just the demonstration of that, like I wasn't letting up. I was not letting up. So the team didn't let up. You don't realize how much your team emulates you, whether they like it, whether they know it, right? They do. So I think out of that whole experience, though, it created an incredible company culture. I have to give that. Like, I think COVID made the best company we could have made because we went through the worst things in the world in our history together. So bright side of that too.
You talk a lot about your team, like the story about everyone being in the food truck together and then like going through COVID and all of that. I mean, what kind of advice do you have women who are looking to hire and create a company culture like you have? What do you look for in the people that you're hiring? Do you look at the resume really in depth, or do you rely more on the interviewing and who they are as a person?
Yeah, I think as business owners, we think all the time that everybody knows what you need, that everything's down to a simple job description, and people should just know. They should just know what we do. They don't know you from Tom, right? You need to put yourself out. If people are going to take the risk of moving from a larger business or a more established business to come help you, they need to know who you are. And I'm very lucky, I feel, because I really put myself out there and my values out there because I wanted to make it clear that I am a woman of color and I really support that. And I think we need to see more of it because if I'd seen someone like me earlier, I might have gotten started in this earlier than I did, right? Or some little girl one day who's growing up in the projects like I did should know that she doesn't have to just be a teacher or a housewife or what, not that there's anything wrong with that, but that your future is much bigger and you should explore things. If you don't see it, you can't believe it. If you can't believe it, you can't dream it, right? And so I always was very vocal about women leadership. I was very vocal about diversity and inclusion, always. And what that ends up breeding is a culture of people really getting to know your value system and coming to you. So I never posted a job, not once. Every person here came to me with their own story and their own why. And I look at their resume and I go, they've worked before. Wonderful. You're in. Because I don't believe if you're smart and you're driven, I don't believe you can not learn this. There was no playbook on how to start a natural frozen comfort food company. There was no playbook on how to start a fried chicken and biscuit shack. There was no playbook on any of this. I'm not an expert. You just figure it out on the fly and you rely on people who are tiny experts in tiny things. And all of a sudden it all makes sense, right? You just pull it all together. And it's all down to people being devoted into you and believing in you and believing in the brand and believing in the company. If that's it, right? It's just a bunch of awesome people doing awesome things together. I think we overcomplicate it a lot. You're always looking for every scanning. Oh, I said 5 years minimum. This guy had 4. He's out. Are you joking? Are you kidding me? Would you want to be rated like that if you went for a job? I always go back to that. I always go back to how I felt job searching and how miserable it felt to be rejected for no reason. So why don't we just start with, you're a good human. I'm a good human. We want to do good things. Let's go. And you know what? You might not be here forever. And that's okay. Maybe I needed you in my life for 3 months. Maybe I needed you in my life forever. You don't know until you get into it. And I think people miss that. Business isn't just about transactions. It's about building something together. There's a guy, when you build a skyscraper, not every person has a role for the entire construction time. Electricians come in first and then they leave. And then the plumbers come in and then they leave. And then the drywall guys finish everything. It's the same concept. So, I think if you put your value systems out there, you create the culture and you let people know who you are as a person, you attract the best people that are supposed to be in your orbit to begin with.
Did you make any mistakes that you felt like when you were hiring? You're like, that wasn't the greatest hire, and here's why.
My husband always says, my biggest strength and weakness is I see the best in everyone. And I don't think it's a weakness. That's where I disagree with him. But I, I've definitely put a lot of faith in folks that I hope would step up for sure. I believe everyone deserves at least one chance or two, right? Things happen. We all don't know what the hell we're doing. We're figuring this out on the fly, but it's when it's like volatile. It's when it's like emotion takes over, or you're putting other folks in jeopardy because of your own self-interest. That's where it gets really tough. And so would I say it was a mistake? No. Were they around us for a time? Sure. What did I wish it was more? Sure. But I don't think I've ever made a hiring mistake where I was like, they almost wrecked me. No, absolutely not. And I don't know if anyone really thought about that, if they could really say, unless somebody like did something criminal.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone's just trying their best, you know?
Yeah. And you learn from every single one of those situations. I think that's what I've learned in these podcast interviews too, is just that no one likes to say they made a mistake, because at the end of the day, they learned something, right? So it's just more like something.
I think, but you have to create a culture of where making mistakes is not punished by corporal punishment, right? Like, trust me, it's gotten very emotional over the last 4 years because there's been a lot of chaos, a lot of mistakes. But when you start with, I have no idea what I'm doing. We're going to do this the best we can, right? We're going to do it wrong. The worst thing you can do is let it go. If it's wrong, fix it immediately, right? Like that's the motto, right? Just make it okay to make mistakes, but have a solution. Don't just be like, it's right and I don't know what I'm doing. That's not, no. Mm-hmm. Stop, breathe, do something else, right? Like, like just try to figure something out, right? I mean, that's all you can do. So I think women are really hard on ourselves all the time. And it's just social, right? It's anthropological at this point. Sit with your legs closed, sit up straight. Don't wear makeup. Don't do this. You're too fat. I mean, like this is how we are bred to think. So I challenge every woman I mentor, every woman I speak to, stop beating yourself up. Like, just, there's no such thing as a mistake if you're fixing it. Just fix it, right? Don't think about failure with a period. I say this all the time. Failures can become ellipses really quickly if you're fixing it. If you accept failure as the end point, then you have failed.
Mm-hmm. I read this book once called Present Perfect. One of my favorite books about people who are like struggle with perfectionism, which a lot of women do. But the psychologists argue there are no mistakes, because what you did was you were doing something that was the best you could do given the situation that you had at that moment. Like, it's definitely a new way to think about it, because sometimes it's like you do make an obvious mistake, but then I think back like, okay, well, I was doing 3 different things at once and I was not really focusing and I just did the best I could in that moment. And then that made a mistake, right? Like it was just an interesting take for me. So the restaurant business is obviously very, very hectic. And you've been talking about the last 4 years. How did you manage to maintain like your business and your personal life? Or were you just like, my personal life did not exist for a long time? What was that like, that process?
I will say I do believe that as a woman, you have a unique lived experience than a man will ever, right? And that, a lot of women choose to be moms as well. It's a lot to balance. So I always preface, I'm not going to sit here and speak on behalf of all women because I am not a mom. I chose the path of making my business my baby. I always tell people I've got 20 babies because I've got to feed 20 people. But I admire people that can do both because it's not easy, right? So what I share is my lived experience as not a mom, okay? But I think not having that burden of making sure house and home and family is there has allowed me to really focus on the business and grow it the way I have. And it's also allowed me to find purpose and balance every day in the business. Like, I love being here. I would do this every day for the rest of my life if I had to. If you're a mom, you probably would say something very different, right? So I think it's just about finding your purpose and what excites you every day. And I find a reason every day to wake up and get excited, whether it's this podcast, whether it's a business meeting, whether it's a tasting event. I make sure there's a reason every day to be excited, something new, something exciting, something fresh, because that really helps recalibrate you as a person. Especially most entrepreneurs and founders are high functioning and high output people, right? When you're a high performer, your tolerance levels are just accelerated. What you can handle is just bigger. It's like athletes, right? You've got premium athletes that are doing professional pro stuff, and you've got the amateurs, right? But premium pro stuff, they're putting their body through it, right? Like you can't even imagine. And it's no different. Like every day I put myself through it, but it's like conditioning. It's like this is making me stronger, better, faster, more efficient, something like that. And then I'd say, just at some point you do reach, and this is natural. I think this is something that people don't like to talk about when we talk about balance, but everybody reaches a break point. Everybody. And feeling like that's the end is the wrong answer, because I feel like people wait to get to that point to feel like they did something wrong. And then they have to have this cataclysmic, holistic, like, I got to change my whole life. No, you don't. No, you don't. You had a breakdown because there's too much going on. That just happens. Okay. Take a breather, right? Reset, change one thing at a time. Like, right? Like, what can you eliminate one thing at a time? I mean, most recently, I've had the hardest time of my life this first half of the year because my mom got diagnosed with Alzheimer's. It was very sudden, and there was just so many things that needed to happen in a very short amount of time. But her life was just chaos, and I was the closest, so I've had to deal with that. We were in the middle of our selling season. On top of that, we're getting out of the doldrums of the crazy COVID world, and it just everything all at once. And I definitely, for the first time ever, felt panicked and overwhelmed. And you just have to step back and you go, okay, one day at a time. I'm going to control one thing at a time, and everything else is just going to drop. And you're just going to have to be okay with it. I was very lucky, very blessed, I'll never, ever not feel proud and humbled by my team, because they picked up anything they could to help me so that I could drop this so I could help her. And I think that's the thing. Like, you just have to realize things that are meant to drop and meant to break will. Things that you have to drop. If you've done the things right, something's going to give and it won't break. And there's things that you're going to be able to fix, right? You just everything gets categorized in those ways, and focus on one thing at a time. So I put myself, for example, through that hell for a long time because I knew it was so much more critical to get my mom set up for success than anything else was. And knock on wood, I believe in karma. I come back here full time again, and everything's like on this grandiose curve of wonderfulness. And I really believe that it's because I focused on the right thing at the right time. And now it's like, okay, the business had its moment. Now in this trimester, now it's about me. So I'm focusing on my personal well-being, my mental health, my physical health now. You can't do it all at once, all the time. You have to pick one at a time.
I love that advice. Because it's like, I think I've had quite a few guests talk about like the seasons of your life. Like there are different seasons. Like you can't expect everything to be running smoothly all the time, especially as a woman with different competing priorities. It's just this different seasons, and just one thing at a time. Take it. You can't do it all at once, right? And it depends what, like right now, your life is focused on your mother, and that's the season of your life. You need to be more family oriented, right? So tell me about maybe one of the, see, I hate using the word mistake, but if you have like a bigger mistake or challenge that you went through while growing your business, what did you learn from it?
I think,
I don't know. Like, I mean, like I look at the COVID, sorry to interrupt, but I look at the COVID thing. I wouldn't say that's a challenge, but that's not really what I mean, because that is something that was like forced on you, right? Like that was something that was forced on you. But is there something that maybe you did while you were growing the business that you thought, I should have done that?
I always believe that retrospect breeds introspection and then breeds like solutions. So it's always hard to say. It was like there's never been a devastating mistake, is that again leads to failure. But I would say um one like early on, for example, I always quote this one because it's kind of funny, but it's also like if I could do it again, I wouldn't, right? When we were growing the frozen brand while we were opening this restaurant, right? We knew we needed somewhere to make the biscuits. And at that time, there wasn't a lot of solutions. There was a commercial kitchen option, but it was small. They were building a new facility and it was still taking longer than we could handle. And we didn't have the restaurant space to build to make all the products. So we're like, what are we going to do? And I was like, I know, we'll build a biscuit factory. We'll build it in DC and we'll attach a restaurant to it. It was like this huge thing and it was going to be so cool because it was going to be like the Ghirardelli factory in San Francisco, but like biscuits, right? And we spent all this money getting the plans done, getting all these people involved, getting all these hopes up because the city was all behind. I mean, it was just nuts. Like it's crazy how quickly things become things when there's a creative energy around it. Um, in retrospect, it was the dumbest thing ever, and I could have kiboshed it within a month if I'd just done some more research because we you can't even actually bring that much Freon into the DC because it's illegal because it's like
Oh,
environmentally banned. And then on top of that, uh, sugar and flour are natural explosives, right? They're very flammable because they're particulate matter that can get in the air. And DC has a terrorism outline, and so we wouldn't have been able to open anyway because the flammables are banned in the terrorism line. So spent all this money all this time, and probably should have just read something about DC's planning requirements, and then I could have prevented all that.
how long did that go on for?
I don't know, maybe like 5, 6 months, and we were all like inking a lease. I mean, there were so many people involved. They must have been so pissed at me at the end. But it's just don't get ahead of your britches, I'd say, is the lesson learned. Like you want to go fast, fast, fast. You want to have everything right now. You can't, okay? And slow down and really evaluate. Sometimes like founders and entrepreneurs are very creative people and we're always thinking outside the box. Sometimes we think too outside the box. Sometimes we're in outer space. So, don't lose that because innovation is bred through that type of mentality. But, you like I did with the Kickstarter, right? Do a litmus test, get a reality check. Don't get too ahead of yourself. I didn't do that in that instance because I was so excited about this crazy idea. You know, reality check yourself, do the research, pressure test before you jump in.
Yeah. Yeah. That's an important lesson. I think that everyone kind of, and I've made that mistake in my business too, where I got really excited about one specific offer or thing and spend all this time on it and do it. And then it's like, because I didn't test it. And then I find out later, like, okay, well, this was why, this maybe totally. I shouldn't have done this. Maybe I should have done a little bit more testing before doing that. Yeah, I've been there. So what are your long-term plans for Mason Dixie?
I mean, I want to be the next billion-dollar comfort food brand. I want to unseat Jimmy Dean and Sarah Lee and all those, Hungry Man, whatever, right? I mean, those are antiquated brands and they don't speak to the modern consumer and they certainly don't speak to our dietary needs, that's for sure.
Well, I look at Jimmy Dean and I think like McDonald's, like fast food, like not healthy. Maybe I should say, like it doesn't, yeah. It's like preservative. It looks greasy. It looks like, well, yeah,
it's terrible. And it's sad that that's allowed to continue. I mean, for perspective, for every 4 of our items on a shelf, there's 69 Jimmy Dean items.
Oh, wow.
So what do you think a customer is going to do? Why are we allowing that much equity to be given to something that we know is innately not okay for us? That's what I hope to change, right? I want to unseat that incumbent in the biggest way possible by showing that all these things are good and simple and that they're just as feasible to be edible, fantastic, and healthy at the same time, right? Mm-hmm. I think that's the biggest thing that I would like to achieve, whether that's in my lifetime or not. I would take this as a legacy brand if I still am not here in this world and it's still going on. That to me is incredible. That's the ultimate reward.
I'm excited to go to my local Whole Foods. I went to your website to see where they were, and I have a Whole Foods in town. So I'm excited to go. I'm going to pick some up because that's my
Yeah,
type of food. I'm so
yeah.
excited. So I'm looking at the boxes. How many do you sell per box? Is it one per box, four per box? How much is it?
We have single serves at Whole Foods, and then we have 2 counts in conventional retailers like Giant Foods or Safeway or things like that. And then if you have a Costco in your region that is carrying our products, we are in an 8 count. So for example, just yesterday we launched a fried chicken waffle in all of the Costco's in the Midwest and soon in the San Diego region as well. So that's really exciting. It's kind of taken us out of that only daytime to now day to night. And it's really precious because that recipe is the restaurant's fried chicken recipe come to life, which is really special to me. So really excited for that.
That is exciting. That brings me back to like my corporate story in the beginning, the fried chicken and waffle. That I was like, what
Yeah,
is
I
this?
know it's funny you said that. I was like, oh, interesting. You said that story.
Yeah, because it was the most bizarre thing. I think just like my parents are both international, but we never traveled much within the US, right? Like we had a
Oh,
timeshare in Florida, but that, I mean, and we cooked our own foods and stuff. So like we didn't really go out to restaurants.
right,
And I'm in Massachusetts right now. I'm trying to think like we basically didn't travel domestically in the US that much. And so
right.
like this was really at like how old was I? 24, 25. My first encounter with like a southern staple that the
Yeah.
woman next to me was like, "Oh yeah, this is my breakfast I have all the time." And I'm like, "What? Chicken
I will
and
say that's one of the most beautiful things about having this business that I never in a million years imagined. I've gotten to see the lowest and highest points in this country. And even at the lowest points, it makes me really proud to be here and to have the opportunity to impact people's lives wherever they are. There are retailers that are doing really awesome things because they're staying local and they're staying in their communities and they're trying to do better by them and to be invited into those environments to help them. I mean, what a reward, right?
mm,
I really always think about something to be grateful for. And I think, even if I'm going to Bessemer, Alabama, if I'm going to, the middle of the Black Mountains in Tennessee, like I've seen a lot of this country and it's a beautiful place. It's a beautiful place.
I love hearing that. I would like to see more of this country. I have a little bit like when I grew older and like obviously my friends when they had weddings, that's where
Mhm.
I would be able to see a little bit more of this country. But since I've had kids and people like stop getting married, I have not been around the US.
Kids, take your kids. Like
Yeah.
I think a couple of many of our folks are working moms, and it's beautiful because most of them have chosen to take their kids on road trips for their, 2, 3 week vacations.
Mm.
And every year they all do something crazy. Like our CGO took their kids they drove all the way from Texas to Vermont. Our COO drove their kids from they did the Route 66 last year.
Oh,
So
cool.
it's pretty awesome, like to have that kind of exposure. And it's, not always fun to be in a car with kids for multiple hours, but their whole little worlds open up, right? The horizons of why this country is so special opens up.
Mm.
So highly recommend
Mm.
the local
Mm.
store.
So you told us where we can find you physically, like um Costco sometimes, Safeway, we've got Whole Foods, obviously. Where can we find you online? Let us know. We'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah, it's our website's masondixiefoods.com, and it has a live tracker of all the retailers that carry us, and then also all social channels. Our handle is at Mason Dixie Foods. And then if you're an online shopper, we are available on Amazon Prime. We're available on Thrive Markets, places like that. So check us out there too if you're not in a grocery store, if we're not in a grocery store yet near
Oh, great. Amazon. That's all you need, right?
you.
So we'll wrap it up with my signature question. What is one philosophy, mantra, or quote you try to run your business by?
Um, I I love to always go back to this colleague of mine. He actually said it to me, not about business. It was about getting his Mexican wife into the United States, and he was having the hardest time, and he was ready to give up. And then he was like, but then I pulled myself up and I said, what have I ever failed at that I've given 100% of myself to? And I never really thought about anything about it. I was sitting there doing my work and then, didn't really think. That quote has come into my head daily for now 25 years. And it's, what have you ever failed at that you've given 100% of yourself to? And I guarantee you can't think of one thing. So every day,
what a good one. Yeah.
I know you don't make mistakes if you're trying to fix them. You don't fail if you are trying to fix something, if you're trying to move forward, if you're pivoting, there's never failure there. So don't be afraid to take the risks, find a reason every day.
I love it. Well, thank you so much. And to recap for our audience, we learned so much from Ayesha. We talked about, how to test your product, to kind of do a risk assessment, make sure your market wants it before really putting it out there, right? We talk about finding every revenue stream possible when you're beginning, bootstrapping, get out there, get interest going and build momentum. And then she also gave us great advice on like being a woman, stop beating yourself up as a woman. Don't look at failures as periods, look at them as ellipses, and then continue. Don't be so hard on yourself and continue to give your 100%. So Ayesha, again, thank you so much for joining this show. And if you are listening and part of this audience and you also loved what Ayesha said, please do us a favor and share it with someone who will be interested, because then you help us grow the show. You help us grow Ayesha's business as well. So again, thank you. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.